The day they buried my husband, it rained so hard the cemetery workers had to hold umbrellas over the casket. I stood there in my black coat, the one I'd bought on clearance at Macy's 3 winters ago, and I thought, this is the loneliest I have ever been in my entire life. Gerald had been sick for 2 years before the end came. We knew it was coming. We said our goodbyes slowly in hospital rooms that smelled like antiseptic and bad coffee. And still, when it was over, the silence in our apartment on Birchwood Avenue felt like something physical. Like I could reach out and touch it. The life insurance paid for the funeral and left me with enough to cover 4 months of rent. That was it. 31 years of marriage, and that was the math of what remained. I was 63 years old. I had worked part-time at a florist shop for 11 years, while Gerald was the one who carried the household. Now the florist had closed during the pandemic and never reopened. My knees ached when I climbed stairs. My reading glasses were held together on one side with a piece of clear tape, and I needed a job. My daughter called from Portland every Sunday. She wanted me to move out there, to sleep in her guest room and help with the grandchildren. She meant well. She always meant well. But I had lived in Millbrook, Ohio my whole life. My friends were here. Gerald's grave was here. The maple tree we planted in the backyard on our 10th anniversary was here. I was not ready to become someone's houseguest, even my own daughter's. So I did what I had always done when things got hard. I made a list. I updated my resume. I put on my good blouse, and I went looking. The Millbrook Community Food Pantry hired me 3 weeks after the funeral. It wasn't much. 22 hours a week at the front desk, answering phones, checking in donors, organizing the appointment calendar. But it was something to wake up for. It was somewhere to be. The pantry was on the corner of Elm and 5th, in a converted hardware store that still smelled faintly of motor oil no matter how many times they mopped. I took the number 12 bus every morning at 8:45, got off at the corner of 5th and Maple, and walked the half block to the entrance. That was how I first noticed the man on the bench. He sat outside the laundromat 2 doors down from the pantry on a green metal bench that the city had installed years ago and apparently forgotten about. He was there every morning when I arrived and still there. Most evenings when I left. He was a large man, heavy-set, with white hair cut close to his head and a beard that had grown past the point of being intentional. He wore the same brown canvas jacket every day, regardless of weather, with a duffel bag at his feet that he kept tucked between his ankles like he was afraid someone would take it. The first few times I walked past, I kept my eyes forward the way you do in a city, the way women learn to do when they're alone. But one morning in early November, a cold front had pushed down overnight and the temperature had dropped to 28 degrees. He was sitting in the same spot, breath coming out in small clouds, hands tucked under his arms. I stopped. I didn't plan to. My feet just stopped. I reached into my purse and took out the $5 bill I'd been saving for the vending machine inside the pantry, and I held it out to him. He looked at my hand for a long moment before he looked at me. His eyes were dark brown and very clear. Clearer than I expected. "Thank you," he said. His voice was low and even. "I'm Walter." "Dorothy," I said. "I work just down there." He nodded like he already knew. After that, I made a point of it. Not every day. I couldn't afford every day. But 3 or 4 times a week, I'd stop at the gas station on my way to the bus and buy a coffee, 2 sugars, and I'd set it on the bench beside him before I went in to work. Sometimes I'd bring an extra granola bar or a banana. He always said thank you. He never asked for anything more than that. We didn't have long conversations. Just a few words about the weather, the way people do when they don't want to presume. I learned small things over time. He'd been in Millbrook about 8 months. He'd come from somewhere in Pennsylvania. He didn't say why he'd left, and I didn't ask. He read real books, thick ones from the library 2 blocks over. He was methodical about it, always finished one before starting the next. He told me once that he liked history, biographies mostly, people who had to figure things out with less than they needed, he said. That's the only kind of story worth reading. I thought about that for days afterward. Meanwhile, things at the pantry were changing. For the first 2 years I worked there, the organization had been run by a woman named Harriet Odom, who was 71 years old and had founded the pantry herself out of a church basement in 1987. Harriet knew every regular client by name. She knew which families needed the gluten-free shelf, which elderly gentlemen refused to take anything that felt like charity, and had to be told the canned goods were overstocked and needed to be moved. She ran the place with a kind of firm, quiet love that I had never seen in any workplace before. Then Harriet had a stroke in February. She survived, thank God, but she couldn't come back to work. The board of directors, 6 people I'd never met who held their meetings by video call, hired a new director. His name was Preston Kavanaugh. He was 34 years old, had a master's degree in nonprofit management from Ohio State, and wore the kind of slim-cut dress shirts that seemed specifically designed to let everyone in the room know you went to Ohio State. Preston arrived in March, and within 6 weeks, 3 things had happened. The supply budget had been restructured, 2 of the longest-serving volunteers had quietly stopped coming, and a new bookkeeping system had been installed by an outside contractor. A young woman named Felicia, who came in on Tuesdays and Thursdays and sat in the back office with the door mostly closed. I noticed because it was my job to notice things. I managed the appointment calendar. I handled donor acknowledgement letters. I saw the numbers that came across my desk, even when I wasn't looking for them, and the numbers weren't adding up. In April, a donor named Robert Hess gave the pantry a check for $8,000. Specifically designated for the spring protein drive, canned tuna, peanut butter, dried beans. I logged the gift. I sent the acknowledgement letter. I watched the shelves. The protein drive never happened. In May, a local church delivered 14 boxes of food they'd collected at their Easter service. I signed the receipt. I logged the items. By the following week, 6 of those boxes were unaccounted for in our inventory system. I didn't know what to say or who to say it to. Preston was my boss. The board was distant and largely decorative from what I could tell. Harriet was recovering in her daughter's home in Columbus, and I didn't want to burden her. I was 63 years old, new to this job, and I had learned a long time ago that women who raise concerns in organizations are often remembered as problems rather than people who found them. So I said nothing. I watched. I made notes in a small green notebook I kept in my desk drawer, and I tried to figure out what I was actually seeing before I said anything at all. It was the second week of June when everything changed. I was running about 4 minutes late that morning. The number 12 bus had been held up by a delivery truck blocking the intersection, and by the time I got off at Maple and 5th, I was moving faster than usual, already thinking about the 3 donor calls I needed to return before noon. Walter was on his bench, as always. I hadn't stopped to bring him anything that morning. I'd been rushed, and I felt a small pang of guilt as I approached. I gave him a quick wave, the kind that's really an apology. He stood up. That stopped me. In all the months I'd been walking past that bench, I had never seen him stand when I approached. He moved to the edge of the sidewalk, and he looked at me directly in a way that was so different from his usual manner that I felt a small flutter of alarm. Dorothy. His voice was quiet, but there was something underneath it. I need to say something to you. Of course, I said. I checked my watch without meaning to. Not quickly. He looked down the street, then back at me. I know you're late, but please. I stopped checking my watch. Something is wrong where you work, he said. The young man who runs it now, and the woman who comes on Tuesdays. I felt the hair on my arms stand up underneath my jacket. What do you mean? I asked, even though part of me already understood exactly what he meant. I sit here every day, he said, and there was nothing dramatic in his voice, just facts, laid out plain. People talk on phones. They don't see me because they stopped looking a long time ago. 2 weeks ago, I heard the young man, the one with the blue car, talking outside. He was on the phone. He said a name. He said an amount. He said she'll fix the records by Thursday. I couldn't move. 3 days later, Walter continued, I heard the woman, the one who parks the gray Honda, talking in her car before she went in. She had the window cracked. She was telling someone the spring audit wouldn't show anything because the new system doesn't flag designated funds separately. I thought about the protein drive that never happened. The 6 boxes from the Easter collection. Walter, I said slowly, how do you know what any of that means? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I was a CPA for 26 years. Keller and Associates, out of Pittsburgh. I know exactly what it means. I stared at him. He reached into the front pocket of his canvas jacket and handed me a folded piece of paper. I wrote down the dates and what I heard as best I could remember. Word for word. I took it. The paper was slightly worn at the folds, like he'd been carrying it for a while, waiting for the right moment. Why are you telling me? I asked. Because you're the one who stops, he said simply. Everyone else walks past. You stop. I didn't know what to say to that. I folded the paper carefully and put it in my purse. Be careful, he said. Don't confront them. Don't let them know you know. Walter, I mean it, Dorothy. These aren't careless people. They chose a small organization with an elderly board and a new director structure on purpose. They know what they're doing. I nodded. I went inside. I sat at my desk for 20 minutes before I could make myself do anything useful. My hands weren't shaking exactly, but they weren't steady either. I thought about Harriet, who had built this place from nothing because she believed that no one in Millbrook should go to bed hungry. I thought about the families who came in every week with their kids, who accepted bags of groceries with the particular careful dignity of people who have had to practice receiving help. I thought about Robert Hess's $8,000, designated and gone. I opened my green notebook. I looked at what I'd written over the past 2 months. Then I took out the piece of paper Walter had given me, and I read it 3 times. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't change my behavior by 1 degree. I came in, I answered the phones, I managed the calendar, I said good morning to Preston with the same mild smile I always used. I watched Felicia come and go on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I noticed what she carried in. I noticed what she carried out. And quietly, carefully, I started making copies. Not of anything dramatic. I didn't have access to the financial system directly. But acknowledgement letters passed through my desk. Donor correspondence passed through my desk. Inventory receipts passed through my desk because someone had to file them, and that someone was me. Every document that referenced a specific donation amount or a specific inventory quantity, I made a second copy and took it home in the bottom of my tote bag and added it to a folder I kept inside the front cover of a cookbook on my kitchen shelf. It took me 4 weeks to feel like I had enough. And then I had to figure out what to do with it. I couldn't go to the board. I didn't trust that they were truly independent of Preston. He'd been hired by 2 of them specifically, and from what I understood, he'd worked with at least 1 of them before. I couldn't go to Harriet. She was still recovering, and it would devastate her. I thought about calling a lawyer, but I didn't have money for a lawyer, and I didn't know who to trust. My daughter called on Sunday, and I almost told her. Almost. But I could already hear what she would say. Come to Portland, Mom. Just leave it. It's not worth it. You're not responsible for fixing everything. She wasn't wrong, but she also wasn't right. On a Wednesday afternoon in mid-July, I was eating my lunch at my desk, a habit I'd developed because I hated sitting in the break room when Preston was there, when my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Tom Beatty, Ohio Attorney General's Office, Charitable Fraud Division. We've received a tip about Millbrook Community Food Pantry. Would you be willing to speak with me confidentially? I read the message 4 times, then I typed, yes. Tom Beatty called me that evening. He was businesslike and calm, and he had clearly been doing this for a long time. He explained that a complaint had been filed by an anonymous source several weeks ago, and that their office had been doing preliminary research since then. He said they'd identified some irregularities in the pantry's 990 filing and in donor records they'd accessed through public channels, but that what they really needed was someone on the inside who had witnessed the day-to-day operations. I told him about my green notebook. I told him about the folder in my cookbook. There was a pause on the line. "Mrs. Simmons," he said, "can you come into our Columbus office on Friday?" I rearranged my Friday shift. I drove to Columbus in my 11-year-old Civic with the folder on the passenger seat, and I sat across from Tom Beatty and two other people from his office for 3 hours and told them everything I'd seen from the beginning. They were particularly interested in one piece of paper I had almost not thought to copy: a donor acknowledgement letter for a gift of $12,000 from a family foundation in Dayton, which I had logged in the system but which had never appeared in the quarterly donor summary Preston distributed to the board. I'd made a copy of both documents on the same day, almost by accident because they were filed together. Tom Beatty held up both pages and looked at them for a long moment. "This is very helpful," he said, which I gathered was the most enthusiastic thing he said to anyone. The investigation took 11 more weeks. I went back to work every day. I said good morning to Preston. I brought Felicia a cup of coffee once, the kind of thing I'd do for anyone who came in regularly, because I did not want even 1 degree of change in my behavior. Walter had been right about that. These were not careless people. On a Thursday morning in late October, I arrived at the pantry at my usual time and found 2 vehicles I didn't recognize in the small parking lot behind the building. One of them had state government plates. I unlocked the front door, turned on the lights, started the coffee maker, and sat down at my desk. By 9:15, Preston Kavanaugh and Felicia Marsh had been placed under arrest. Felicia's real last name, it turned out, was not March. She and Preston had been running variations of the same scheme at 2 other small nonprofits in the past 4 years, using different names, different cities, the same basic structure. They had stolen a total of $41,000 from Millbrook Community Food Pantry over 8 months. Tom Beatty called me that afternoon. He thanked me for my cooperation. He said my documentation had been instrumental. I sat at my desk after we hung up, and I cried for a little while. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way you do when something has finally resolved and your body doesn't know how to process the relief. I called my daughter that Sunday and told her everything. There was a long silence. "Mom," she finally said, "you could have been fired, or worse." "I know," I said. "You should have told me." "I know that too." Another silence. Then, "Are you okay?" "Yes," I said, and I meant it. The board of directors brought in an interim director while they conducted their own internal review. 3 of the 6 board members resigned. Harriet was consulted from Columbus and sent a long letter that was read aloud at an all-staff meeting, which made everyone cry, including the interim director, who had only been there 11 days and hadn't even known Harriet. They asked me if I'd be willing to take on additional responsibilities in the transition period. I said yes. 2 weeks after the arrests, I stopped at the gas station on my way to the number 12 bus and bought a large coffee, 2 sugars, and a blueberry muffin. I walked the half block from the corner and sat down on the green bench beside Walter. He looked at the muffin. "Don't read too much into it," I said. "They were out of granola bars." He almost smiled. "I heard there was some trouble at the pantry." "There was," I said. "It's been addressed." He nodded. He looked out at the street. A city bus went past, throwing a gust of cold air. "Walter," I said, "can I ask you something?" He turned. "Why are you still here? In Millbrook, I mean. It's getting cold. Do you have somewhere warm to go?" He was quiet for long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. "I had a son here," he said finally. "He passed 2 years ago. Heart attack, 47 years old." He looked down at his hands. "I came here to see where he'd spent the last part of his life. I didn't really plan past that. I didn't say I was sorry. It felt too small. Instead, I said, the pantry has a housing assistance program. It's been a little chaotic lately for obvious reasons, but it's still running. There's a caseworker named Renee who is genuinely excellent at her job. Would you be willing to let me make an introduction?" He looked at me for a moment. "You're not going to stop, are you?" "I'm 63 years old," I said. "I stopped stopping a long time ago. It's the only thing that ever got anything done." He picked up the coffee. He held it with both hands the way you do when something is warm and you want to feel the warmth of it. All right, he said. An introduction. I introduced him to Renee the following Tuesday. By Thanksgiving, Walter had a room in a transitional housing facility on the north side of Millbrook. He had a library card. He was volunteering 2 mornings a week at a different food bank across town, helping them organize their inventory system because it turned out that 26 years as a CPA had left him with very strong opinions about how a pantry shelf should be categorized. I saw him most Thursdays. We had gotten into the habit of eating lunch together at the diner on 5th, the one with the vinyl booths and the pie that was genuinely worth the $4.50 they charged for it. He always ordered the same thing, a bowl of vegetable soup and a piece of apple pie. And so did I, eventually. We talked about books, mostly. He was reading a biography of Frederick Douglass and had strong feelings about the translator of a history of ancient Rome he'd gotten through the library system, which he was willing to discuss at length. Gerald had been gone for almost 2 years by then. The silence in the Birchwood apartment had changed its quality. It was still there, it was always going to be there, but it felt less like a wall and more like a room I was learning to live in. I called my daughter on the Sunday before Thanksgiving. She asked how I was doing, and I thought about it honestly before I answered. Better, I said. Genuinely better. The job? She asked. Partly, I said. There was a pause. Mom, are you going to tell me the whole story someday? Probably, I said. Over pie. She laughed, and the sound of it came through the phone and settled into the apartment on Birchwood Avenue and stayed there for a while, warm and ordinary and real. I thought, afterward, about Walter saying I sit here every day. People talk on phones. They don't see me because they stopped looking a long time ago. I thought about all the things that are happening right now, this very minute, just outside the frame of whatever we happen to be staring at, all the people we step around on our way to wherever we're going. A cup of coffee, 2 sugars, left on a bench. You truly never know what you're starting.